Good evening. My name is Scott Feinberg, and I serve as the awards season analyst for The Hollywood Reporter, and it's a great privilege for me to be here tonight to moderate a very special evening. Tonight's Q&A is unlike any other that I've ever been a part of. I think there really has only been one like it ever, in that we will be posing questions to our guests, not only from me, the moderator, and not only from you in the audience here at the Directors Guild Theater in New York, but also from the thousands of people who are joining us around the world online. And so I have in my hand here an iPad that is getting questions live, and we're going to just pick and choose. So to begin with, let me introduce each of our guests separately. Our first is a very noted director, both on the stage and now on the screen more recently. We got to know her through the film Mamma Mia, which also brought her into touch, I guess, with our second guest, who we'll get to in a moment. But and they have reunited for this film. So please join me in welcoming Phyllida Lloyd. Our second guest probably needs no introduction, but for the sake of it, let me just say she is an actress who is as celebrated as any for so many great screen performances and so many important movies over the last 35 years. It is truly one of the great honors and privileges of my life, forget career, to be able to say to you, please welcome Meryl Streep. So,
thank you, God.
Of course, first thing is just thank you both for making time to do this and be with us. And as I mentioned, I'm going to start off with a couple of questions just to get things going. Then we'll go back and forth between the audience and the people joining us over the internet. So just to begin with, we just mentioned that you two previously worked together, and I wonder if you can share how you first met and got to know each other and apparently really hit it off.
Phil,
I was scared.
Yeah.
Yes, we met when I went to ask Meryl to be in Mamma Mia, and I was scared, and she said yes straight away without really reading any of the small print.
No, because she asked me to be in Mamma Mia after apparently seeing Mother Courage. So I thought, this woman is cool. If we can go from Brecht to ABBA, we'll be on a good journey. So we had a wonderful, wonderful time, great rapport. Phyllida has directed mostly theater, right? You used to run the Royal Court for a long time, and people are familiar with that theater, and does a lot of operas, and is just a divine, sure, and calm Helms woman. So I felt in good hands going into this.
When along the line, was it during Mamma Mia, was it after? When did the idea first come about for you and be brought to your attention to do the second film now, The Iron Lady?
It was quite a long time after that, and I was sent the screenplay, and quite soon after that, my masters said to me, what do you think about Meryl Streep from Margaret Thatcher? And for my instinctive reaction was that Margaret Thatcher was one provocation, and Meryl Streep was the second, and I just kind of froze. and wondered how England would take this combustion. And then about 15 minutes later, I recovered and kind of went, my God, yes, of course, you know, she's the only one who can do it.
Your master? What's a master?
Our masters at Pathé.
Oh, the bosses. Yeah. Okay. Got it. The money talks. Yeah.
And how was it brought to your attention for the first time?
Phyllida called me, and she said, I've got to... We had been speaking, you know, periodically, and I had been telling her about my dream to make a movie about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and I know that sounds funny, but I do have an interest in sort of things that we don't want to handle in movies or look at, because I think anything forbidden is really exciting, you know? Nudity is nothing. It's not really a provocation. Try to talk about leaving and dying and all those things. So that excited me. This particular take that Abby Morgan took with this screenplay was really, really great. 3 days in the life of a little old lady who just happens to be the person who was the longest serving prime minister in the 20th century and the only female in the Western world to rule a nuclear country. And I mean, pretty interesting stuff. To look at a life at its ebbing end, at its, you know, in its diminishment. That really interested me.
And it's sort of King Lear-like in a way.
There you go, babe.
Let's go to the audience for a question, the in-house audience. Would you just raise your hand, and if you say it, we'll repeat it? People are a little shy at the moment. All right, well, okay, sir.
It was a brilliant performance.
Thank you. Thank you.
Were you ever concerned about portraying a union buster? I mean, the irony is we're all union.
Yeah.
Concerned about sentimentalizing her, or perhaps saccharing over her political views? It may be different from your own.
Just for the folks at home, were you ever concerned about over-sentimentalizing her, I guess, or?
No, the question was, were you worried about portraying a union buster as a member of Screen Actors Guild, a proud member of the Screen Actors Guild? No, I mean, I just think that there are so many secrets in lives that we've decided we know everything about. And that's what I like to know about. I like to know the other stuff that I don't know. I had already decided, oh yeah, I knew everything about Margaret Thatcher, you know, and Ronald Reagan and everybody that I disagree with, you know. But you don't know everything, and it's just why we're alive is to learn more. And God, the compassionate journey into disagreeable territory is just really, I don't know. I feel like that's why I work, is I really like to portray prickly people, or people that are just sort of, you know, difficult women on a certain level. And I wanted to know what it was like. I mean, I remember, you don't, you're so young, but I remember what it was like in 1979. You know, I went to high school when there were no girls' sports, none. I mean, it was just a given. If you wanted to jump up and down, you could be a cheerleader, but I mean, this really appealed to every feminist bone in my body, which is a dirty word nowadays, but it did. The achievement, how she got there, how hard it had to, how she had to be 10 times more prepared than anybody. And to the union question, one thing we don't understand necessarily here in America is that the unions were state I mean, all the utilities were state-owned. It's different here. You know, I guess it would be as if the movie companies were all owned by and administered in Washington, and our union was going up against the state. So it was a different kind of circumstance, I think. Not to say that the steps she took to dismantle the socialist state were not draconian. But that's not what our movie is really about. Our movie is about her history through her eyes. And her regrets may not have been political regrets. And her sadness might not have been triggered by entirely political things. You know, you'd have to do a documentary to go through the Westlands controversy, for instance, and why she wanted to buy Sikorsky helicopters instead of helicopters from Europe, and why she was opposed to the European Union and scared of Germany, and all these things that exist in her life. Her life is incredibly rich and interesting and controversial. But we took things from 3 days of a life, things that would be called up by a fire on the television, an explosion. What memory would that trigger? A son calling and saying he's not going to make it again up to see her. And what memories would that trigger about lost sons? And it's, it's imagining Margaret Thatcher as a human being, which is very, very hard for some people.
Our first question from the internet comes from Jasna, and it is, what, for each of you, is your funniest memory from the shooting of The Iron Lady, since there is actually quite a lot of comedy incorporated into it, and so your memory of the funniest experience making it, and the greatest challenge of making it.
I think my funniest memory is of a day when the paparazzi were chasing Meryl, and there were about 200 people standing outside a newsagent and saying, you know, there's the big car, she's coming out, that's got to be her car, that must be her. And Meryl, dressed as old Margaret, was shuffling round the crowd, kind of going over to the catering wagon and asking what was going on, and having a look at the sandwiches. And that was pretty cool.
And for you?
That was funny, yeah. I'm just so bad at anecdotes. I don't remember anything, really. I go into a funnel of, we had $14 million to make this movie that takes place in like a million different eras, and no time in which I think I worked 9 weeks, right? And a makeup that took a lot of time. Usually they'd give you 4 months to make a movie that had that sort of requirement. So I remember laughing at Jim Broadbent. Is very, very funny and charming, and so is Olivia Colman. And they made me laugh every day, but I went home in a coma at the end of the night, and got up in the morning and went back in, just so happily. But yeah, anecdotes, no.
Coming around the cycle again, I want to ask you guys, what sort of advanced preparation and study? Obviously, we lived through Margaret Thatcher, but in terms of revisiting it and thinking about it for this role and this film, what was the most interesting thing to you to sort of either discover or rediscover about a person who it's interesting. A.O. Scott in the New York Times just recently wrote, there's a whole generation of people now who really, many of them don't know who she is. So in your experience, what did you take away from the preparation period?
Oh, wow. Well, I thought I'd really better be prepared to do this one. Some of them you can just sort of roll out of bed and go to work. And this one, I realized that there would be, it would be a different kind of challenge. So I knew I had to read a lot, and I gave myself over to that. But in terms of having the time to prepare and immerse myself in the character, a lot of things happened in my life, and I couldn't get ready. Life took over. And so I just, Phyllida had given us 2 weeks rehearsal in London, and I came and said, can we have 1 week of rehearsal, and can I just sit in my house and eat, sleep, and dream Margaret Thatcher? And she said, yes, you let me do that. So that was amazing. And I sort of went to jail and sort of shut myself up and did all the, cramming I could. And then, yeah, it was nerve-wracking.
I think that in England there are only really two ways of looking at Margaret Thatcher. For the last 30 years, the debate has been sort of stuck in kind of aspic, the sort of monster witch, she-devil, who ruined the lives of millions, and on the other side, the blessed, sainted Margaret, who saved England from its post-war doldrums. And I think what was incredible in the preparation was meeting a lot of people on both sides of the divide who had other stories to tell about gender and class. And I think one of the things that really impressed itself on me was that class seemed to be the thing that set her apart even more than gender. The sort of condescension of this very patrician party towards her. And so that preparation of talking to not just people on her side, but people who work for her was, that was a whole revelation.
And to talk to, it's interesting because everybody has a blood red opinion. Just a throbbing, opinion of her. And we talked to, are we allowed to say who we, no. Neil Kinnock. We talked to people that were not, necessarily her friend in the days. But there was a common thread through all the assessments, friend and foe, bitter foe. That was valuable. You could sort of begin to see the through line of a person, of the relentlessness, of the determination, and certain elements that were surprising, very surprising.
And the complete isolation of her.
Exactly.
And that in some way, that we decided to choose, in a way, very few incidents from her political life. We just chose the ones in which she was looking back and feeling entirely isolated and embattled and on her own.
Yes, things like when she, as an older person, and we used what we knew in our own lives for the imaginary part, the part nobody has access to, her current life, but to sort of bring parts of our own stories and what we know personally about that state, and to know what we know about growing older and looking back and thinking about choices you've made, and all of those things, like hearing the whispering of people. My father would hear whispers all the time, and when he was 92. And it threw him right back to Newark, New Jersey, and to terrors of his childhood. And we would go right from the nurses in the hall whispering. And that to me was exactly this. That's what you found and Abby found in this screenplay, that, you know, there's sort of a bleed between what's really happening in the room and what's always happened in your life. And so that's what we were looking at, the evocation of those memories and why they were particularly called up in certain moments of this 3 days in her life. I'm so rambling. I'm sorry.
No, it's, our next question from the internet comes from Amanda, who wanted to ask, to play Margaret Thatcher, you had to obviously completely change your physical appearance and voice and posture and movement and all sorts of things. And just, she's curious to know, do you prefer playing someone who's sort of more like yourself, or that you really have to go to such lengths to
What
get
makes
into?
you think I'm not like her? I mean, there
You seem a
are
little
whole
numb.
parts of my personality that completely dovetail. Wouldn't you agree?
I think you know about leadership, yes.
No.
I think she's referring more to sort of your speed of movement and that sort of thing, but
It was really hard to stand like that for a long time. Just even in her younger things, she kind of pitches forward, and it puts your balance in a different thing. But also, when she was older, to curve your spine like that, I really needed a masseuse, you know, while we were there.
and just for the aging and all of that, what did that entail? I think as a common question that seems to be coming through here. The act, just on a practical level, it seems like it would be quite a makeup job.
It is, but you know, you have the old man that you're going to be right here with you right now. You do. And I have the old woman I'm going to be. One thing my grandmother told me when she was 93, she said, and I was sitting cross-legged on the floor in front of her, she said, "In my mind, I can do that." I can do that. I know I can't, but I think I can. And so I thought, it really went in, and I thought, if she feels that way, if she feels like me, what part of me feels like her? And I've always been interested in, you know, old ladies and that sort of...
You said that you got a lot of the physicality of her from listening to her rather than looking at her, didn't you?
Absolutely. Her physicality, because she had so much stamina, what you noticed as an actor, trying to replicate certain... I took speeches that she gave in the House of Commons that are not in the film. And I just tried to, you know, say them along with her. And I couldn't... I mean, I have so much drama school, and I could not keep up with the breath and the attachment to conviction and the thought that follows through in the breath. And they taught us in drama school that thought, you know, is carried on the breath, and so if you can possibly get to the end of the sonnet without breathing, you will... See, I can't do it. You will convey the point. But listening to her gave me an idea of really the reserves of strength that she had, and also how she had to stand and sit and always be alert. Yeah.
If we can go back to the audience for our next question. Yes, ma'am.
One of the scenes that I loved, amongst many, was the meeting where you're very stern with Jeffrey, and then they all leave the room and you're by yourself. And I'm very curious how that scene came about, if it was scripted, if there was some information you gleaned from her peers about how she had those moments of going from prime minister to mother, you know, male stern to the female caretaker, and your performance of it which your hands were shaking. The first scene we see of hands, or it seems a young Margaret and her father. So I'm just curious from a historical sense, was her father alive when she took office, at least her first parliamentary position?
He died before she became Prime Minister.
But while she was head of the party still?
He didn't see her become leader of the party,
No.
no. And that scene was based on very close to something that happened. I mean, she used to behave like that often, particularly to that minister.
We spoke
and
to someone
who witnessed it.
who was there.
But there was something sort of, you know, more mythic, more kind of Shakespearean about that moment. I felt as if she was somehow, it was almost as if she knew she was losing it and she was asking someone to put a bullet in her head. That's how I saw it. That
Metaphorically
yes.
speaking. That was the second day of shooting, too, by the way. Thank you, Phyllida Lloyd. Really.
Many of us don't know what you're responding to because we couldn't hear any of the questions.
Oh!
Okay. We'll correct that here. I see a question from Melissa.
We have to repeat.
Yes, I will. Yeah. Melissa. Yes.
I was very interested in her lack of relationship with her mother. She kind of seemed to not have any attachment to women in her life. She also said she was more happy in the company of men. So talk a little bit about that and kind of the gender aspect of that whole kind of being in leadership and being the only woman in the room.
Question for those at home and people who couldn't hear it here is just what was, can you talk about her her thoughts about gender, how in her family life and professionally she seemed to gravitate towards being with men more, in the company of men more than women?
Yes, and the questioner mentions that she didn't seem to have a relationship with her mother or other women in her life. And I think partly this interested me. We live in a world still where sons are favored. She was one of two daughters at a time when perhaps that was true in England. I don't presume to say, but we do know that that feeling exists around the world, and it's a vestigial one. And this father favored, we feel, this golden girl who seemed to be so bright and have so much promise. But her road was a very unusual one. You can't emphasize that enough. First of all, to get a place in chemistry at Oxford, and then decide to read law, and then decide to go into politics was unusual, to say the least, right?
Yes, and I think she just couldn't get away from Grantham, where she came from, fast enough. I mean, she's supposed to have learnt all her political sort of nous and instinct from serving in the shop, which really gave her this sense of how far she thought society could be pushed. But I think just her mother as a role model was not at all helpful. But the irony of that line about, you know, I've always preferred the company of men, is that you see this story in which ultimately it was men who betrayed her and to whom she felt most venomous. So in the end, she was left quite almost, I don't mean friendless, but there was something as if she'd somehow, the cost of this sort of dedication to men and perhaps not having many women friends, that was what you saw of her at the end.
Yes, and I think, too, that there are parts of her life that we don't cover. I mean, we don't. The relationship with the woman who served her for many, many years, Crawfie, And in the end, she is living in a house with women. It's an iron lady irony.
Catherine online once would like me to ask Phyllida, sort of way before the film was seen by anyone, there were people who were griping that anyone, let alone an American actress, would dare portray Margaret Thatcher, and there have been there were gripes about it for a while, and before anyone really had a chance to judge the film on its merits, or what you chose to cover, or how you chose to approach it. What would you say in response to those people now that you've had a chance to put it out?
I mean, I would have said people were actually less upset about an American actress playing Margaret Thatcher than they were about the idea of Margaret Thatcher at all. People started on the IMDb website. They started with, a year ago with, well, this is going to be, it's a load of lefties, a load of liberals that are making it. It's going to drag her through the mire. And then the other side started, no, it's got Hollywood behind it. It's going to be a whitewash job. And then they began to forget the movie and just start tearing each other to bits. If you'd lived in Glasgow, you'd seen the state of shipbuilding in the early 80s, etc. And the film was just as nothing. It really was just, and that is what's going on. People are angry about the film in England who haven't seen it.
Yeah, that's true.
Hopefully you'll forgive me for probably being the millionth person to ask you this question, but one of the ways that you as an American actress were able to so convincingly portray her was to do a great accent, which is something that you have done many times before. And just to quickly remind people, British in The French Lieutenant's Woman, Polish in Sophie's Choice, Danish in Out of Africa, Irish, American in Ironweed, Australian, Cry in the Dark, Italian, The Bridges of Madison County, Irish, Dancing at Lingasa, Upper Midwest, Prairie Home Companion, Bronx in Doubt, Julia Child in Julie and Julia, and now Margaret Thatcher. And so just on a practical level, how do you do it? Is it something that you sit for hours and listen to yourself or listen to tapes? Or I think a lot of people would love to have half the ability that you have to do just that one little thing that you do.
That's like the easiest thing that I do in my brain. That's the kid part of it. Is copying a voice in my head that I've heard before. And it just comes in, and I work hard. I mean, it's not easy. I work hard but for me, it's not, it's part of a whole thing. To capture how someone speaks is to capture them, because how people speak delivers their personality on a certain level. And, I like me, I hesitate. I say I look around the room for the answer to the question that I've partially forgotten what it was. But to me, that's character. That's character. That tells you about Margaret Thatcher. From the moment she drew breath, she knew where she was going in the sentence, she knew the point that she was going to make, and she knew exactly the point in which the sentence that the person was going to try to interrupt her, and she wouldn't let that happen. That's character. It's everything. So I don't think of it as separate from the other work of living as someone else and taking on their body and their cares and their feelings and who they love and what they miss and all that stuff. The sound of it maybe is because I think people who have musical or have a little bit of a musical bent catch on quicker to accents. But my theory is everybody can sing and everybody can do accents. everybody I've ever met thinks they can do Julia Child. They do. Right. They all say.
Okay, the next question from the internet comes to us from Robert, who would like to ask both of you just sort of a variation of the same question, which is working with a female director versus male directors, which vastly outnumber them still, even as we make our way into the 21st century. And so what in your experience is, you know, is it sort of different, preferable? And for you, Phyllida, do you find that it's, do you run into difficulties or roadblocks or, you know, with actors or people that you work with just throughout the industry as a female director, it's still kind of in rare company these days?
In film, it's rare.
In films, right.
Yeah, I think coming from the theatre where people are very tolerant of gender, I didn't really realize I was a woman director until I walked onto the set at Pinewood Studios when I did Mamma Mia, and everybody was calling each other governor, good morning, sir, morning, sir, and then looking at me, oh, morning. There just was no word for it. But this time round, I sort of decided to
They would say, after a while they said, morning, Mom, and I thought they were calling you Mom. But, you know, in English, that's ma'am. Yeah. They say, morning, Mom. They said that after a while. Yeah.
But on this time round, I just decided to work with people who didn't call each other sir and governor, and it was a whole different experience.
And
we called Meryl sir, obviously.
Quite right. Yeah, it was. I was privileged to see this from the other point of view. You know, I was in Mamma Mia. There definitely was a difference between that crew and I think that's 7 years maybe that, you know, they're getting more used to it. There's more of us everywhere, and there was a definite difference in this crew. I have to say, at the end of Mamma Mia, one of the toughest grips announced to the group, and it was only after a couple of lagers. He said, "I'd walk on coals for Phyllida Lloyd." Yeah, she won him over.
We're going to go back to the audience, this gentleman. Yes, sir.
I thought the film was brilliant, your performance was brilliant. I have a question for each of you. Why did you decide you wanted to do this film about Margaret Thatcher? And have you ever thought about directing?
So to repeat the question to Phyllida, why did you want to make a film about Margaret Thatcher in the first place? And to Meryl Streep, why have you ever considered directing yourself?
Initially, I think I just had a sort of shot of terror went right through me when somebody said a film about Margaret Thatcher, which I knew was a good sign. I loved the screenplay, and it was a chance to work with Meryl again. It was just all kinds of things about it that seemed... the fact that it wasn't a conventional biopic, and yeah, it was too good to miss.
Yeah, but I also think that every movie is an opportunity to tell something about your own life, you know? I mean, at least that's the way I work it out, is kind of as therapy in some way. And so you end up telling all sorts of little things that, bringing things that don't necessarily have to do with the plot, but they kind of help it along. They're tangential. They're things that are called up in you by the screenplay that you feel, and you can insert them into this story that is ostensibly about someone else, but it's really about you, you know. And that's the opportunity of doing this. No, I'm never going to direct anything. I like going home and forgetting about it at the end of the night, and you really can't. When you're directing, you have to think about where they're going to park the trucks, and
We did call Meryl IAD, which was in all departments.
yes, I'm in all departments. I wouldn't want to limit myself by directing.
She said there was only one department she hadn't quite mastered to perfection. That was reloading the camera. You've still got that.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. But now I just made a digital movie, and I can do that.
A question from Zachary via Facebook. If you could each talk about your experience working with Jim Broadbent, one of my favorite actors, I would love to hear it.
I think, well, just from my own point of view, I'm such a fan, and when I see him, he makes me happy. So it was almost like he was doing the job that Dennis did in the movie for her in this, and such an unusual character to play this person who was really ridiculed for his position as house husband, as first man, you know, whatever they would call it. No one had a word for it. Talk about not having a word for it. This man who, by virtue of his wife having an important role, is diminished somehow necessarily by that fact, and is a clown, a silly figure. And the real Dennis Thatcher, from the things that Jim and I discovered in reading about him and in talking about all of this, he took it all in pretty good humor, and he sort of used it as a way of hiding, maybe, who he was and how important he was to her. But I loved working with him. I mean, he's just the most generous soul.
We talked about this this movie very much in terms of a King Lear story, in which Dennis was Margaret's fool to some extent, not foolish, but her kind of wise companion wit who was going to love her when everybody else had gone. And Jim has that extraordinary kind of tender, quirky, eccentric sort of honesty about him, and then that seemed just to be quite suitable.
Mm-hmm.
Our final question, and then we will free you guys, is just what would you each like people to, in a perfect world, take away from this film? Would you like them to think differently in some way about Margaret Thatcher or what she represented or the era that she came from? Is there something that you would be very pleased to know people left here thinking?
I would like to think that everybody that got on the subway and saw some old ladies sitting across from them, that they would imagine that a whole huge life lay behind all those wrinkles and that seemingly nondescript, forgettable. I mean, there is almost nothing less interesting in our consumerist society than an old lady. Dismissed. We don't make movies for her. We don't give a damn. We can't sell her anything. She doesn't buy anything. But just the idea that everything, the whole panoply of human experience, births, deaths, struggles, joy, everything's in there. And just to imagine that's what I would hope.
Yeah, I would just second that and just say I think the best compliment that we had was a guy who came to see it who said, I just wanted to rush out and phone my sister in Australia and my mum, who I feel guilty I haven't spoken to for 3 weeks. And just that idea that however much we become obsessed and absorbed in our work, our careers, somehow maintaining those human connections is important.
Well, thank you both very much. And if everyone would not, if you wouldn't mind just holding for 1 second while we say thank you and allow these guys to get out of here in peace. But thank you guys both
Thank
very
you
much.
very
Really
much for
appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
hosting us.